The blazing Arizona sun scorched the town of Silver Creek, stirring dry dust into the heavy air already thick with the smell of sweat and desperation. Virgil, dressed in tattered clothes and worn down by endless days in the mines, made his way through the noisy throng outside the train station. His pockets held little more than dust, and each passing week made the dream of gold feel like a cruel joke. He had come to the auction hoping to pick up a used tool or maybe a horse with some strength left in it. But what he stumbled upon froze him in place. At the heart of the crowd, something unspeakable was happening. A young woman, frail and hollow-eyed, stood shackled to a post like livestock. A cracked leather collar was pulled tight around her neck, the chain trailing to the hand of a hulking man whose grin revealed yellow, rotting teeth. People shouted out numbers like it was a game. The woman's face burned with humiliation, her eyes dulled by pain and long-suffered indignity. Virgil's stomach turned. The air was foul with grime, body odor, and the sickening smell of cruelty. Flies circled lazily in the heat, indifferent to the human shame on display. $15, someone barked, their breath thick with drink. $20, another shot back. Hungry for ownership. Virgil clenched his fists. He glanced at the coins. He had barely enough to get him through the week. His throat was dry, his body tired, from hunger and hopeless labor. But the look in that girl's eyes, the way they'd gone vacant, made something inside him tighten. $35. He barely recognized his own voice. It was rough, uncertain, but loud enough to silence the others. The crowd turned to look, a murmur rippling through them. For a broken-down miner to offer that much, it shocked them. The auctioneer, weary and sharp-eyed, narrowed his gaze at Virgil. Any more bids? $35 for the girl. Going once, going twice. Silence blanketed the square. The girl slowly turned her head. For the first time, there was a flicker in her eyes, surprise, maybe even a fragile spark of something else. Her torn dress clung to her thin form, every stitch telling the story of hardship. Sold to the man in the dusty hat, the auctioneer said, slamming his gavel against the crate. Virgil stepped forward, heart hammering in his chest. The man holding the chain laughed, then handed it over without a word. Virgil took it, his hands trembling not from fear, but from the weight of what he was accepting. Without speaking, he unfastened the collar from the girl's neck. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She simply folded it on herself, crossing her arms over her chest, her entire posture cloaked in shame. The wind picked up, swirling dust around them. Virgil stood still, the chain hanging loosely in his hand, realizing he had just made a choice that would shape both their lives. What lay ahead was unclear, but whatever future they faced, it would require strength neither had fully discovered yet. As the sun dipped low in the sky, it cast long shadows that stretched across the dirt, reaching toward a future they couldn't yet name. The road out of Silver Creek was harsh and quiet. Dust clung to every inch of their clothes, and silence stretched between them. Ada hadn't spoken a word. She walked beside Virgil, her eyes distant, her footsteps slow. Though the collar was gone, an invisible shroud still clung to her, a prison. Without walls, the desert opened before them in every direction. A harsh sea of brush and jagged rock beneath a pale sky that offered no mercy. The only sounds were the crunch of their boots on dry earth and the sigh of wind across the flats. Virgil cleared his throat. "Name's Virgil," he said, voice dry and low from the dust. "I'm headed north. There's a mine there I work at, up in the hills." Ada didn't stop walking. She didn't look at him. Just a small, almost imperceptible nod. The space between them wasn't angry, it was heavy with silence, layered with fear, and worn down by the scars of whatever she'd endured. Virgil didn't press her. He understood trust wasn't something that could be demanded. It had to be earned. One step at a time, ***, he kept a respectful distance as they walked, careful not to intrude on her space, all the while scanning the vast horizon for danger or the glimmer of water. The desert stretched endlessly under a searing blue sky, its silence broken only by the crunch of their footsteps on dry earth. Water was scarce, a constant concern. Virgil, without hesitation, handed her his last canteen, watching as she drank, her throat working urgently, each swallow a testament to her thirst. When a sudden sandstorm struck, They scrambled for cover beneath a jutting rock ledge. The wind screamed like a beast, hurling grit against their faces and tearing at their clothes. As they huddled together, Virgil became keenly aware of her vulnerability. He wrapped his coat around her, shivering as the cold air crept under his shirt, the sand relentless in its invasion. That night, seated near a flickering fire that barely held back the darkness, he tried once more. "Do you have anyone, anywhere to go?" he asked quietly. The fire cast shifting shadows across their faces, the night vast and consuming beyond its light. For the first time, she lifted her eyes to meet his. The emptiness he had grown used to seeing in them now carried something deeper, grief, perhaps, or weariness etched into her soul. Her reply was no more than a breath. "No," she said, barely audible. "I have nowhere." It was the first time she'd spoken. Virgil felt something shift inside him, a small crack in the wall she'd built around herself. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. He couldn't foresee what lay ahead, or how he would protect her from the harshness of the land. But in that moment, with the fire crackling low and the stars glittering above, he knew he would try. He wouldn't leave her. The road ahead was long and unforgiving, but with every step, something invisible grew between them, a bond, faint yet steady, like a thread spun from silence and necessity. One night, the lonesome cry of a coyote echoed through the wilderness, and strangely, it didn't make them feel more isolated. It reminded them that they weren't the only ones surviving out there. As the days turned into weeks, the dry desert gradually gave way to a rugged, hilly terrain. The nights grew cooler. The wind carried the scent of pine and damp soil, in step with the changing land. The distance between them began to lessen. Ada, still guarded, no longer flinched at his presence. She took water from him without hesitation, offered small nods, and sometimes, just sometimes, even smiled. Virgil taught her the things he had learned through hardship: how to recognize which plants were safe to eat, how to listen for signs of nearby animals, how to set traps for small game. She watched him closely, curiosity sometimes flashing across her face like the glint of sunlight on metal. Eventually, they reached his claim, a rough hole in the earth that held more hope than riches. Nearby stood a modest cabin, built against a rock wall, sturdy and weather-worn. It wasn't much, but it was secure. Inside, the space was sparse, yet it carried a feeling of shelter. For the first time in memory, Ada allowed herself a breath of calm. One evening, as Virgil stirred a pot of stew over the fire, Ada spoke again. Her voice was hesitant, but each word carried weight. She told pieces of her past, not all at once, but enough. Her parents had been settlers who lost everything. When they couldn't repay their debts, she was sold like livestock. The man who had bought her was only one in a series of exploiters who viewed her as a thing, not a person. As she spoke, Virgil didn't interrupt. He simply listened, allowing her to empty the pain that had long been locked away. The firelight danced across her face, revealing the tears she didn't let fall. He said nothing, because there was nothing to fix, only something to witness, and she needed someone to witness it. Still, their peace was fragile. The area was home to other miners, coarse men hardened by greed and isolation. Word of Ada's presence spread quickly, twisted by rumors and suspicion. Their stares were hungry, their whispers venomous. One afternoon, a few of them came too close. Their grins were crude, their intent clear. Ada instinctively stepped back, her body shrinking inward. Without hesitation, Virgil stepped between her and the men. Though he wasn't known for violence, something inside him ignited a furious resolve to keep her safe. He faced them down, words sharp as broken glass. The standoff crackled with tension, his quiet fury pitted against their drunken bravado. And though no blows were exchanged that day, the message was clear. If it came to it, Virgil would fight for her. Eventually, the intruders backed off, sensing the unwavering seriousness in Virgil's expression, the kind of steel-eyed resolve only a man deeply protective of what he cherished could hold. Ada watched it all unfold, and something shifted inside her. What started as gratitude deepened into admiration, something warm and solid. Later that evening, she gently cleaned the scrapes and bruises Virgil had sustained. Her fingers were soft, deliberate, a quiet tenderness that mended more than just his skin. In those simple acts of care, something unspoken began to grow. Their bond, once born of desperation and circumstance, was now rooted in shared strength. Though the terrain ahead was uncertain and the mountains still held their dangers, hope flickered with new life in Ada's heart, kindled by Virgil's quiet bravery and unwavering kindness. The mountain air, sharp and clean, carried not only the smell of pine but a faint whisper of something better. Life at the mining cabin settled into a kind of rhythm, grueling labor for Virgil, and a new way of living for Ada. She learned the ways of the mountains, how to cook hearty meals from little, men-torn clothes, and tend the tiny space that had become their home. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was companionable, even comforting. They grew to rely on each other, two souls finding refuge in the presence of the other. The cabin, which once only served as shelter, now pulsed with the quiet sounds of domestic life. Dust drifted in golden beams of sunlight that streamed through the windows, dancing like flecks of memory. But the past doesn't often stay buried. Whispers began to make their way through the small network of traders and miners who occasionally passed through. Tales of the auction in Silver Creek and speculations about Ada's origins began to spread. The rumors were laced with cruelty and judgment. The look she received, lingering stares and muttered words, cut deep. The small community, while rugged and isolated, was not immune to prejudice. Ada felt the shift. Her newfound safety started to feel fragile. She grew quieter, her eyes darting more, her shoulders tenser. Virgil noticed. He could sense the heaviness returning to her, the way she curled into herself when strangers were near, the haunted silence that crept back into her posture. Then came the day that would test them both. Virgil had gone to the mine. As usual, Ada remained behind, tending to the cabin. When a group of rough men approached, faces red from drink, their movements loud and clumsy. Among them were some Virgil had clashed with before. Their laughter was coarse, their intentions thinly veiled beneath the guise of drunken jokes. Ada froze at first, the old panic rising fast, when one of them, Silas, a broad-shouldered man with rotten teeth and a leer, stepped toward her and reached out. Something inside her cracked. The fear that had kept her bound for so long turned to something else, hot, sharp, and wild. Without thinking, she grabbed the fire poker from beside the hearth. Its weight steadied her hand, and her eyes, once dull with defeat, now blazed with warning. "Don't come any closer," she shouted, her voice fierce and unfamiliar even to herself. It wasn't a plea, it was a command. A guttural cry tore from her, raw and unrelenting. The men paused, stunned by the ferocity of her defiance. And then Virgil appeared, exhausted, clothes dusty from the mine. But his presence radiated purpose and threat. He took in the scene in an instant, the weapon in Ada's shaking hand, the fear on her face, the gathering of men. But what struck him most was the fire in her eyes. He stepped in front of her without a word of hesitation. "You heard her," he said quietly. "Now get out." The weight of his voice, the conviction behind it, made the men flinch. They grumbled, spat curses, but one by one, they slunk away. The dust from their retreat hung in the air like smoke. As the last one disappeared, Ada's grip loosened, the poker falling to the wooden floor with a dull clang. Her hands trembled. She looked at Virgil, eyes glassy with emotion. A tear slipped down her cheek. "Virgil," she breathed, voice cracking from the force of what she'd just survived. And in that moment, something between them solidified, not out of fear, but out of shared resilience. Emotion thickened the silence between them, her voice whispering his name, the only sound that truly mattered. In that quiet utterance, she laid bare everything he had come to mean to her. And in that single moment, Virgil felt all doubt vanish. He pulled her into his arms, sensing both the vulnerability in her frame and the quiet strength that had begun to take root. The love unfolding between them was like a flicker of light in endless shadow, a quiet vow that no storm would break them. Though fear still lingered faintly in the air, it was gradually being replaced by something gentler, a fragile but unmistakable sense of hope. That evening inside the cabin marked a turning point in both their lives. What once had been fragility in Ada began to harden into determination, and Virgil's fierce protectiveness deepened into something softer, but just as powerful and enduring. Unconditional love. The haunting echoes of their past began to lose their hold, dulled by the growing strength of their bond. Ada, encouraged by Virgil's steady presence, started sharing the wounds she had long kept hidden, the injustices, the humiliations, the cruel hands life had dealt her. Virgil never interrupted, never judged. He simply listened, his silence comforting, his gaze kind. Each painful confession she offered seemed to loosen a brick in the emotional walls she had built, slowly freeing her, piece by piece. Life around the mine didn't get easier. The labor was still backbreaking, the gold still scarce, but Ada's presence changed everything for Virgil. She became his reason to keep pushing forward. With each passing day, he worked harder, not just for survival, but to build something real. He began imagining a life beyond the dust and darkness of the mine, a small stretch of land, maybe a few animals, a place to call their own. That dream grew in him like a quiet fire. Some of the better men in the area took notice. They saw how Virgil toiled with purpose, how Ada changed, her spirit no longer dim, but glowing with quiet confidence. The whispers and stares that once followed them slowly faded, replaced by nods of respect. People who once doubted began to understand. That rough cabin in the hills became more than shelter, it became a sanctuary, where trust was slowly rebuilt, and peace found a home. One brisk morning, as golden sunlight spilled across the peaks, Virgil sat on the porch, sipping from a tin cup and watching Ada bend over a patch of herbs. The air was sharp and clean, the earth still damp with morning dew. She looked up at him, her eyes locking with his, and a gentle smile spread across her lips, one that held no trace of the pain she once wore like armor. The early light caught in her hair, setting it aglow like molten gold. She walked toward him and sat at his side, her hand slipping into his, warm and sure. "Virgil," she said, her tone even but full of emotion, "I love you." The words weren't grand or flowery, but they carried the weight of everything they had endured and everything they now believed in. His heart swelled. Tears gathered in his eyes but didn't fall. He didn't need riches, didn't long for fame. What he had now, sitting beside him, was more valuable than any fortune. Not long after, they stood together before a traveling preacher, with a handful of trusted companions as witnesses. The ceremony was modest, no fine clothes, no music, no feast, but it held a sacred honesty. Their vows were spoken not for show, but for each other. Ada's dress was plain, but carefully kept, and to Virgil, she looked more radiant than any bride in lace and jewels. When he looked at her, he saw not the woman from the auction block, but someone reborn, strong, whole, and finally free. The wild land around them remained harsh and unforgiving, but their path forward no longer felt impossible. Virgil and Ada, hand in hand, would brave whatever trials came their way, fortified by love and unshakable trust. In a world that offered little mercy, they had found something precious and enduring. The sun climbed higher over the peaks, spreading light across the rugged land. It signaled not just another morning, but a fresh beginning, one where redemption had triumphed over sorrow, and love, quiet, fierce, and enduring, had taken root in even the hardest ground.